Hello and a very warm welcome to the Analyst dated 19 January 2026, brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi, wherein we'll be covering the 7 set of current affairs issues which have featured in today's newspaper. The handout of this very discussion has been pinned in the comment section below for your future reference. Beginning with the analysis section, in the first topic, we'll try and understand that why India needs to invest in infrastructure projects, what are challenges we are witnessing when it comes to financing of infrastructure projects, and what needs to be done in order to realize the idea of $7 trillion economy by 2030. Moving on to the second topic, as today itself, the UAE president has arrived to India. So in this particular respect, we'll try and understand the area of cooperation between India and UAE and the challenges between the two countries. Moving on to the simplified section, herein we'll be covering the 5 set of current affairs issues in the most simple manner possible, and wherever needed, we'll be doing the value addition which would be relevant for your upcoming prelims examination. So stay tuned. Now, beginning with the first topic, which is dealing with the infrastructure financing in India, this particular topic we can directly relate with GS Paper 3 infrastructure topic. Why are we discussing infrastructure today? Because today itself, Delhi government has stated that they have released its share of funds when it comes to 4th phase of the Delhi Metro rail transit system, wherein we are developing 3 more corridors. Okay, which are these 3 corridors? Lajpat Nagar to Saket Ji block corridor, Indralok to Indraprasth corridor, and Rithla to Kundli corridor. Now, we are not going to have a detailed discussion with respect to the metro. What is important from our mains perspective is how the infrastructure financing is done in India and what are the challenges with respect to the same. Because time and again UPSC has asked mains question with respect to this. Okay, now in this particular thing, when it comes to metro also, the Delhi government has given its share. The other amount of money would be coming either from the central government or from some other institutions. That is the reason infrastructure financing in India becomes the important element when it comes to the mains examination. Now, when it comes to the infrastructure financing, more than 70% of the financing is coming from the public sector or the government, and less than 25% is basically contributed by the private sector. Alright. Now, if you go by the CRISIL report of 2024, CRISIL in its report has pointed out that when it comes to India, we need to invest around 143 lakh crore by 2030. And in the last 7 years, how much investment we have done in the infrastructure? It is half this amount, that is 67 lakh crore. So we need to almost double the investment that we are doing in the infrastructure. Alright, so this is data fact that you can use whenever you are writing an answer with respect to infrastructure financing in India. Alright, now why do we need to invest in infrastructure? According to the economic survey, investing in infrastructure is important because it creates a blueprint for Amrit Kal, okay, realizing the idea of Viksit Bharat by 2047. Why the economic survey says that it is a blueprint for Amrit Kal? Because when the government invests in infrastructure, it would lead to creation of job opportunities in, sectors like construction. It would create, job opportunity in the electricity sector, etc. Okay, iron, steel, etc. So ultimately, because of increased expenditure done by the government in the infrastructure creation, we are witnessing crowding in. Basically, it is incentivizing the private sector also to increase their investment. Ultimately, because of the investment done by government, crowding in of the private sector investment, we are going to witness job creation in India. Okay, so ultimately, when there would be job creation, this would lead to increase in GDP because of the local multiplier effect. And when it comes to multiplier effect in India, it is roughly 2.46. And when the GDP would improve, it would be easier for the government to mobilize more tax revenue. So when the government would be able to realize more amount of tax revenue, it would be easier for the government to repay the money which it has borrowed to do the capital expenditure, basically to invest in infrastructure. Okay, that is why it also helps in improving the debt sustainability. This is not the scenario when the government does a lot of revenue expenditure. Because in case of revenue expenditure, if the government is giving a lot more subsidies, pensions, etc., that is not going to improve the tax revenue. And ultimately, it would make the debt more and more unsustainable. Okay, that is what is the freebie problem. Now, another element why we should invest in infrastructure is to basically reap the benefits of the demographic dividend. As I told you right now, if the government does the investment in the infrastructure, what happens? We create more and more job opportunities in the construction sector. And construction sector has a high employment elasticity. It is emerging as one of the largest employer after the agriculture. Then, in order to realize the idea of inclusive growth also, we should increase the investment when it comes to infrastructure, because it helps in enhancing the quality of life. Now, how these two things are related? Normally, when we think about infrastructure, what comes to our mind? Only the physical infrastructure. But infrastructure is not just limited to physical infrastructure. It also contains your social infrastructure. Okay. For example, PM Shri schools. Okay. The Arogya Mandirs that we are creating. Okay. Then, when it comes to infrastructure, you also have digital infrastructure. Here we have the example of ENAM. Here we have the example of ONDC platform, Open Network for Digital Commerce, which is used by MSMEs to market or to sell their products. So, when we invest in infrastructure, it helps us to improve the quality of life. Okay, for example, the roads being built under the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, that is going to improve the quality of life in the rural areas. Then, we need to invest in infrastructure so that we can address this poor modal pattern that we have in India. If you look at railways, when we got independence, roughly at that time, 1951, the total railway track length was merely 50,000 kilometers. And in 2024, we have been able to increase it to 65,000 kilometers. Just an addition of 15,000 kilometers from the time we got independence. And when you talk about the roads, herein majority of the traffic passes it through national highway. And when you talk about the national highway, they comprise merely 2% of the total road length in India. So, because of this, since we have not invested more in the railway infrastructure, what is happening in India? We have a poor modal pattern. In India, as you can see, majority of the cargo passes through road, okay, as compared to railway. But at the global level, what happens when it comes to transportation of the cargo? That majorly takes place through railways, and that helps us to reduce the logistic cost also. So, in order to reduce the logistic cost further, although when it comes to the current data which is available, it has reached to around 8% of the GDP approximately, but it can be reduced further. Okay. When we invest in infrastructure, we can move in the direction of multimodal transportation. Then we need to create disaster resilient infrastructure, because when you go by the climate risk index of 2026 that is released by German Watch, India is the 9th most affected country, okay, when it comes to the extreme weather events. And in this respect, we should learn from Japan. Japan has built disaster resilient infrastructure. And from the climate change point of view also, and from air pollution point of view also, it becomes all the more important, because if you go by today's article itself, the Commission for Air Quality Management has pointed out that by investing in the metros, what we are doing, we are giving a push to public transport. And this is needed because according to this particular body, one of the major reason of particulate matter 2.5 pollution that we are witnessing in the Delhi NCR region, it is because of the vehicular pollution. And in order to reduce that, we should give a boost to public transport like metros. Okay, this is another reason why you should invest in infrastructure. Now, coming to another dimension, what all issues we are facing when it comes to financing the infrastructure projects? We will be discussing the issues from various players' point of view. Okay, when it comes to government, what challenges the government faced when it comes to increasing the investment in the infrastructure? First and foremost reason is, when you look at the government tax to GDP ratio, it is very less as compared to the OECD's countries, wherein the tax to GDP ratio is more than 30%. But when it comes to India, it is merely 18% of the GDP. Okay, so when you have lower tax, ultimately the government is left with less amounts of fund which it can use it to do the capital expenditure. Then there is delay and cost overruns. So, according to Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, because of lack of coordination between different ministries, Okay, we face problem in land acquisition, we face problem in getting the environmental clearances. And because of this, let's suppose a project was planned today, but it is, finally starting after 10 years. Don't you think so? The cost of, that particular project that we have estimated 10 years before, that would be quite different. The cost of raw materials would have increased manifold in those 10 years, which we wasted just because, we had to take a lot of clearances, and this was because of lack of coordination between different ministries and departments. Because of this, what is happening when it comes to the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, in India, 43% of the projects are getting delayed because of lack of coordination between different ministries and departments, and it is leading to a cost overrun of around 5 lakh crore. Then another problem is when it comes to the state governments. Now, state governments are more, doing expenditure when it comes to providing freebies. And that is the reason they are witnessing debt unsustainability. In this respect, you can refer the example of Punjab. Okay, therein the debt has increased to around 46% of the gross state domestic product. So these are the problems that we are facing when it comes to government. And when it comes to government, another challenge is the quality of expenditure. So if you look at central government or state government, the revenue expenditure is usually higher than the capex. Although when it comes to the capex in India, it has tripled in the last 4 years and it has reached a magic figure, that is 11.11 lakh crore. But still, the revenue expenditure is higher when it comes to capital expenditure. Then when it comes to banks, why banks are unable to finance the infrastructure projects? It is because of the asset liability mismatch. What is the asset? If the bank gives loan for the infrastructure project, that would be an asset. And liability is the deposit that you and me maintain with the bank. Now, when it comes to the liability of the bank, it is for a shorter period of time. But when it comes to loans given for infrastructure creation, that is asset, this would be for a long period. So how the bank would be able to finance the long gestation period infrastructure projects? Because the funds which it is having, because of the deposit which you and me maintain, that the bank is having for a short period. If it gives out that money for infrastructure project, it could happen that suddenly a lot of people come and withdraw their money. So that would, create a bank run kind of a situation. Another problem why banks are not able to finance the infrastructure projects is because of the financial repression. What is financial repression? When you look at the statutory liquidity ratio, the banks can keep this in form of cash, in form of gold, or in form of government securities. Ideally, the bank do not keep a lot of cash because that does not give any kind of return. They'll invest in gold, but currently, although gold is giving good return, but it is not always the case. There is high volatility. So ultimately, bank end up investing in government securities. Okay. Now, the problem is when it comes to government security, they offer lower return as compared to high quality corporate bonds. But because of this SLR requirement, statutory liquidity requirement that we have imposed on the commercial banks, they are not able to invest in corporate bonds. That is leading to crowding out of the private investment. So these are the problems that we have from the point of view of banking sector. Now, the private sector is left with one another option, that is bond market. But when it comes to India, here the bond market is highly underdeveloped. If you compare it with China or you compare it with South Korea. When you talk about the corporate bond market, the money that the corporate entities are able to borrow by issuing bonds, it is around 18% of India's GDP and almost double the amount the Chinese company can borrow from their bond market. And that is the reason when it comes to China, the bond market is around 36% of China's GDP, which is quite bigger as compared to India. Okay. Now, why when it comes to India, we have an underdeveloped bond market? It is because when it comes to whatever bond that are issued, okay, majority of the bonds are given for private placement. It's not like you and me, retail investors, can invest in those corporate bonds. It is majorly being released for certain qualified investors. Okay. They are typically placed with a small set of institutional investors. So the investor base is very less. Then when it comes to the pension funds and insurance fund, which actually have the ability to invest in the long-term corporate bonds. But the problem is they can they are allowed to invest in only those corporate bonds which have a higher rating. So ultimately the small players like MSMEs, their bonds would not be enjoying this much of credit rating. So ultimately they are not able to raise the money from the bond market. And when it comes to the India's corporate bond market, it is majorly the PSUs which have, because their bonds are basically backed by the government. So they have a sovereign backing. So ultimately because of this thing, when it comes to the rating of the PSU's bond, they have a higher rating. So ultimately what happens, this insurance fund, pension funds or the provident fund, they actually end up investing in the PSU's corporate bonds only. The other corporate entities are not able to exploit the bond market adequately. When it comes to the provident fund, it is not allowed to invest in the corporate bonds which have a maturity period of beyond 3 years. Why? Because provident funds are basically managing the requirement, the retirement related money. So the people can withdraw that money for medical needs or some other purposes. Okay, so that is why the provident funds who do have the ability to invest when it comes to the long-term corporate bonds, but they are not allowed to do so. So these are the reasons why when it comes to India, the bond market is underdeveloped as compared to China and South Korea. Then if you try to get the money from outside India, we have to face exchange rate volatility risk. What is exchange rate volatility risk? Let's suppose today if I borrowed the money, $1 was equals to 60 rupees. But after 5 years, if I have to repay that money, at that time $1 becomes equal to 100 rupee. So in rupee terms, I have to pay more. So when it comes to getting the finance outside India, you have to bear this exchange rate volatility. And when it comes to FDI in infrastructure, that is quite low. It is again because of the long gestation period. We are getting more FDI in the service sector as compared to infrastructure. Now, in order to address the issues in the infrastructure, what all initiatives the government has taken. So first and the prominent initiative is your National Infrastructure Pipeline, which was launched in 2019, wherein the government has decided that we will be investing this much amount, 111 lakh crore by 2025, and this entire money would not be coming from central government. 39% of the funding would be coming from center, again 39% from the state governments, and 22% of the funding would be coming from the private sector. And as you can see, that majority of the infrastructure funding would be going to energy sector, road sector, okay, as compared to ports and digital infrastructure. Then we have National Monetization Pipeline. Now this is a very interesting initiative because here we are not creating any new asset, rather we are monetizing the brownfield asset, and that to core assets, not the non-core assets. What are core assets? Basically the roads, the airports, the ports, etc. What are non-core assets? Basically land and building. So here we are not creating altogether a new asset. Already a asset is there with the government, but it is not giving adequate return. Okay, brownfield asset is there, and it is also need to be a core asset. Now what the government would be doing? Government would lease out this particular asset to private sector. Now in return, the government would be getting what? Some upfront money, and by using that upfront money, government can again create new assets, new core assets. And when it comes to the private sector, after getting that core asset, what the private sector has to do? It has to upgrade that particular asset, and since it has upgraded that asset, now the private sector is allowed to levy user fee. Ultimately, the private sector would be recovering the money that it has spended in upgradation of that core asset and the money which it has given to the government. And at the end of the lease period, again, the asset would be transferred to the government. So here ownership is not getting transferred. We are only leasing out the core assets to the private sector. And when it comes to this National Monetization Pipeline, it is basically working on lease, build, operate and then transfer model. Now, here I have written that it leads to recycling of assets. Let's understand how it leads to recycling of assets. Let's suppose government created one new core asset, brownfield asset, which the government can lease out to private sector. Now, when it would lease out, the government would be getting upfront money from the private sector. And ultimately, by using this money, again the government can create new core assets. So this recycling of assets would be happening because of this national monetization pipeline. Now, another important element that we have, that is your Gati Shakti. Now, I told you that one of the problem when it comes to infrastructure creation is delays and cost overruns. It is because of lack of coordination between different ministries. So, in order to solve this issue, the government came up with Gati Shakti. The main purpose is basically to improve the coordination between different government ministries and departments. Now, what are the pillars? Let's look into that. First important pillar is comprehensiveness. So, on a single portal, you can get the detail of all the infrastructure projects which the government has planned and what the government has executed. And now this information is also accessible to the private sector. So, whatever the government is planning and whatever infrastructure projects have been executed, based on that, the private sector can also plan the infrastructure projects. Then we have the prioritization. Now, what do we mean by prioritization? Earlier, what used to happen? The road department used to construct the road, and then the water department used to realize that no, we also need to lay down the underground water, water pipes. So, what we are going to do now, when we are planning this thing that, okay, a road needs to be constructed in this area, we will be prioritizing this thing that, okay, before this road construction, we also need to lay down the underground water pipes also and underground water cables also. Then optimization. Now, in optimization, what we'll be doing, while doing the planning, we'll see this thing that what are the critical gaps when it comes to infrastructure planning. Let's suppose, with respect to the metro example. Now, don't you think so while planning this metro thing, the government also needs to look into that, do we have the adequate road connectivity to the metro? So, that sort of comprehensive planning needs to be done. Another example could be, let's suppose the government is planning that we will be coming up with a fertilizer plant in a particular area. So, in order to build the fertilizer plant, the necessary gas pipeline also needs to be let down. So, this is something the government would be analyzing. So, this is optimization is at the planning stage. We identify that what are the critical gaps when it comes to infrastructure planning. Synchronization is basically improving the coordination between different ministries and departments. So that it's not like once we have constructed the road and then you are digging the road and then you are putting in the underground drainage water pipes. Then analytical tools. Herein we are going with the single window clearances. Okay, so that clearances are given at a faster rate. And here it would not be data integration, it would be dynamic. Okay, so dynamic, what it implies that whenever we are building an infrastructure project, closely related projects would be executed together. For example, the simple example that you can take is, let's suppose a national highway has to be built. So, along with this we know that underground drainage water pipes needs to be let down, underground cables also needs to be, put in before the national highway is constructed. So, closely related infrastructure projects would be executed together. Okay, that is what is the dynamic element. This picture I created through AI, that is the reason I time and again tell to the student, don't use artificial intelligence. Okay, there could be error. It would not be data integration, this would be dynamic element. Now, coming to NAFID, that is National Bank for Financing Infrastructure Development. It was created through an act in 2021 and the purpose is basically to provide the finance for long gestation period infrastructure projects, and this would be regulated by RBI as an all India financial institution. Then we have the viability gap funding. What is viability gap funding? We use this thing wherever we think that this infrastructure project is not economically viable, but it is important from the perspective of inclusive growth. Okay, example could be the viability gap funding provided by the government under the UDAN scheme. So, how the viability gap funding basically works? So, the government would be looking that what is the operational cost of the airlines and what is the difference between the rates that we are offering, because the government is trying to make traveling through airlines more and more affordable. So, if the airline is not able to meet its operational cost, then this much difference would be provided by the government. That is what is viability gap funding. So, when it comes to the UDAN scheme, it is not so economically viable because the airlines are not able to realize their operational cost also, but it is important from the perspective of inclusive growth. Okay, so these are the initiatives that we have taken. Now, when it comes to writing the way forward, all you have to do is you just have to reverse the issues that we discussed when it comes to financing for infrastructure. Time and again students tell me that, ma'am, you have not written this in the PPT, not written that in the PPT. There are certain things which you need to learn now, because when you will be writing the mains answer, this is the thing that you will be doing. The issues, if you know, you just have to reverse it while writing the way forward. Now, what would be the way forward when it comes to the government point of view? We need to increase the tax to GDP ratio. How we can do that? By enhancing the tax base. Basically, we can talk about including the agriculture income also. I'm not going to get into that debate that whether it is right or not, but to expand the tax base, you need to do that. Then we also need to address the issue of tax evasion. Okay, so all these things would help us to improve the tax to GDP ratio. 1 or 2 points you have to write. Then we need to improve the coordination between different ministries and departments so that we reduce the delays and the cost overruns. Then when it comes to state government, they should improve the quality of expenditure that they are doing. So more and more capital expenditures should be done as compared to the revenue expenditure. Coming to the banks, what suggestion we can give here? So you can say that in order to address the financial repression, the bank should be given a choice that whether they want to invest in government security or they want to invest in high quality corporate bonds. Alright, now when it comes to the bond market, you have to quote the recommendation given by HR Khan committee. So you can give the suggestion that we should basically allow the insurance and pension funds to invest in the corporate bonds, okay, not just high rated corporate bonds. This should not be the scenario. Then we should increase the investor base. We should allow the corporate bonds to be open for more and more retail investors. And we should also come up with the Credit Guarantee Corporation of India, so that if a corporate house fail, then this entity would be repaying some amount of money to the people who have invested their money in corporate bonds. That would, increase the investors' confidence when it comes to the bonds, corporate bonds. And lastly, to address the issue when it comes to exchange rate volatility that we face if we want to get the funds for infrastructure creation from outside India, how we can address this exchange rate volatility? For this, we have to give a boost to internationalization of Indian rupee. Okay, so all these way forward you can suggest. So on similar lines, as you can see, UPSC has asked a question, and on similar lines, I have also framed a practice question for you people. So do practice these 2 questions. With this, let's move on to the next topic. Now, today itself, the UAE President has arrived India and he'll be holding bilateral talks with the Honorable Prime Minister of India. This particular topic you can associate with GS paper 2, that is India and its neighborhood relation. Now, the first thing that we need to understand from our mains point of view is what are the areas of cooperation when it comes to the 2 countries. First, let's look into that how is the economic relation between the 2 countries. So, when you talk about the bilateral trade, herein, because of the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement which the 2 countries signed way back in 2022, the bilateral trade between the 2 countries have exceeded more than $100 billion in financial year 2024-25. What is this Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement? Wherein the 2 countries not just lower the trade barriers when it comes to goods, they also lower the barriers when it comes to services, when it comes to investment. So the 2 countries would be, investing more in each other's economy. And when it comes to UAE, it is India's 3rd largest trading partner and it is India's 2nd largest export destination after US. From the energy point of view, if you talk about, UAE is very important for ensuring energy security because UAE is India's 4th largest source of crude oil and 2nd largest for liquefied natural gas and liquefied petroleum gas. Way back in 2024, we also signed MOU with UNG when it comes to long-term LNG supply. Then, if you talk about the things that we export to UAE, so you can see here we export petroleum products, gold and other precious metal, and which is the item that we import from UAE. Here you can see it is crude oil and other petroleum products. Now, when you talk about the investment front, herein UAE is the 7th largest in total FDI which is received in India between the period of 2000 to 2024. And UAE Sovereign Wealth Fund has also invested in India's renewable energy sector. Now, the 2 countries way back in 2023 have also signed the local currency settlement system. What do we mean by this? So, under this, the 2 countries would be using their local currencies for doing the cross-border transaction. That means, if India is importing something from UAE, we will be making the payment in UAE dirham and vice versa if UAE imports something from India. This would help us in reducing our reliance towards dollars. And this is also one of the steps towards internationalization of Indian rupee. Then we have given boost to digital payments. So the Indian tourists which are there in UAE, and the Indians who are living in UAE, they can use the UPI network. Then from the geostrategic point of view, UAE is also important. The two countries are carrying out joint exercises to counter the terrorism. Okay, so we have Desert Cyclone, Zayat, Talwar and Desert Eagle. These are the joint military exercises to counter terrorism. Then UAE is important when you talk about the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. When you talk about the connectivity between the two countries, we have 1,500 flights which move between India and UAE every week. Then the two countries also cooperate on various multilateral forums. When you talk about UAE, it supports India bid for entry into the UN Security Council. And the two countries collaborate on various multilateral forums like BRICS, I2, U2, UAE, France, India Trilateral Forum. And UAE was also the guest country at G20 summit during the India's presidency. Then we also have good people-to-people relations. We have around 3.5 million Indians which are living in UAE, and when you have Indian diaspora abroad, you will also be getting the benefit in form of remittances. So this Indian diaspora accounts for around 19% of the total remittances which came to India in financial year 2024. And one important milestone that we had with respect to UAE in the cultural domain is the Bab's Mandir, which is the first Hindu temple in UAE. Now, having understood the areas of cooperation, let's explore what are the bone of contention between the two countries. First and the prominent issue is the non-tariff barriers. Okay, sanitary, phytosanitary measures, and in UAE, we have the mandated halal certification, which negatively impacts India's exports when it comes to poultry, meat and processed foods. And because of these non-tariff barriers, what happens? We have trade imbalance. So in financial year 2022, India was running a trade deficit when it comes to UAE. Then we have the China checkbook diplomacy. China has deep pockets, so it is able to offer huge amount of money at a lower rate of interest. And what is happening because of this? It is crowding out the Indian companies. So Indian companies are not able to increase their investment when it comes to UAE. That negatively impacts the economic relation. Then in UAE, we have a very problematic system, that is kafala system, wherein the Indians normally they take the money, okay, large amount of money they take, and then they enter into a debt trap. They are not able to repay the interest, and ultimately what happens in this? Here the employer has a disproportionate control over the migrant workers' immigration and employment status. So you cannot leave UAE once you have gotten trapped into this kafala system. You have taken large amount of debt and then you are not able to repay it. So you are not allowed to move outside UAE and you cannot leave that job also. Okay, so this is a kind of inhumane condition of work that is prevalent among the blue collar job, basically the jobs related in the construction sector. Then UAE is known for giving loans to Pakistan, and we know Pakistan is known for sponsoring cross-border terrorism. So in a way, the money which is provided by UAE to Pakistan, it is being used by Pakistan to endanger India's national security as well as sovereignty. Then UAE, being a member of OPEC, is guided by the OPEC interest rather than aligning with India's stance, because we, being a huge importer of crude oil, we don't want the petroleum products or crude oil prices to go up. But UAE, being a member of OPEC, it has its own interest in increasing the global prices of crude oil. Then, because of the regional tensions which are going on between Israel, Palestine, Lebanon and Iran and US also, other players also entering into the conflict going on in the Middle East, this is severely impacting the connectivity projects like the IMEC, that is India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. Lastly, what needs to be done to improve the relation between the two countries? So first and foremost, when it comes to the non-tariff barriers, the UAE needs to be transparent on a timely basis. It should share the information with the Indian businessman that what kind of labeling, what kind of quality it needs, okay, so that the Indian exporters do have the idea and we can increase our exports. Then we need to promote the trade diversification. So the two countries should try to focus on emerging sectors like renewable energy, pharmaceutical technology, etc. Then we should align with UAE's Vision 2021, wherein the UAE is trying to diversify its economy and it is trying to reduce its dependence on oil. So India can come forward in this respect and we can collaborate on renewable energy, startups, fintech to deepen our economic relation with UAE. And India should raise the concern with UAE with respect to reformation of kafala system. Just like Qatar has promised India that it would be reforming the kafala system, because India has insisted in this regard. And we need to engage proactively. So there should be proactive diplomacy so that we can make sure that the regional tensions do not have any negative implication on the bilateral relation that we have with UAE. That's all with respect to this topic. So I framed a practice question for you people on the lines, whatever we have discussed. Try and write this particular question. With this, let's move on to the simplified section. Now, beginning with the simplified section, recently the Supreme Court in one of the landmark judgment, that is KP Kiran Kumar versus the state, has given various guidelines with respect to child trafficking. This particular topic you can associate with GS paper 2, issues related to vulnerable section. So in this particular judgment, that is KP Kiran Kumar versus the state, the Supreme Court has stated that when the court is analyzing the testimony of a minor who is a victim of child trafficking, so while analyzing the testimony, if there is some minor discrepancy and that does not change the core aspects of the case, then in that case, just on the basis of minor discrepancy, the testimony of that minor child trafficking victim should not be done away with. Okay. We should be analyzing, the court should be analyzing the testimony given by a minor victim of child trafficking with sensitivity. Now, in this particular judgment, the Supreme Court rightly pointed out that when a child is forced into child trafficking, it grossly violates its fundamental right under Article 21, that is right to life and personal liberty. And it also takes away a rights, the right of a children under Article 21A, that is right to free and compulsory education. Now, if you go by the NCRB records, between April 2024 to March 2025, the government have been able to rescue more than 53,000 children, and we have been rescuing them from child labor, trafficking, kidnapping across India. But the problem is low conviction rate. Conviction rate is merely 4.8%. And previously what used to happen, just because of minor discrepancy, the court used to negate the statement given by a minor victim of child trafficking. That has been addressed by the Supreme Court in this particular judgment. Now, when it comes to child trafficking, you need to know about one of the UN protocol, that is Palermo Protocol of 2000. So this basically deals with addressing the issue of human trafficking, especially with respect to women and child. And when it comes to this particular protocol, it defines child trafficking as recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring or receipt of child for purpose of exploitation. Now pay attention to this word exploitation, because under this particular protocol, exploitation has wider scope. Exploitation does not mean only the physical and sexual exploitation. It also includes slavery, servitude or forced removal of organs. Now, when it comes to India, what all rights are enjoyed by children here? So, we are trying to protect the children from human trafficking, begging, forced labor under Article 23. And we are preventing their employment in hazardous industries like fire, cracker related or matchbox related factories when it comes to children below the age of 14 years. And we also have Article 21A, which talks about free education. Okay, free and compulsory education. Then in the DPSP also, we have Article 39, which basically states that children should not be abused and they should not be forced because of the economic necessity to take up a particular vocation which is unsuited to their age or strength. And under Article 39, children are also given opportunity. So it is the responsibility of the state that it provides adequate opportunity to the children so that they can develop their personality fully, and we ensure that they are not exploited against the moral and material abandonment. Then what all laws we have in India to protect the children? So we have Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita section 98-99, which is dealing with buying and selling of minors. Then we have Immoral Traffic Prevention Act, which basically prevent the trafficking for sexual exploitation. Then we have Juvenile Justice Care and Protection of Children Act, which basically talks about that how the state have to take care of the children which are rescued from child labor, from child trafficking, etc. Then we have criminal law amendment done in 2013. Okay, so this particular act has provided the comprehensive definition of trafficking the way we had in this UN protocol, that is Palmero Protocol. As you can see, the same definition. It also covers slavery, servitude, forced labor and organ removal. And it also covers trafficking irrespective of the consent given by the minor child. Then we have the POCSO Act, and the best part of this particular act is it is gender neutral. So it protects the boys as well as girls who are less than 18 years of age. And it defines the offences. It covers sexual assault, having material related to child pornography, and it provided for stringent punishments also. And in order to ensure expedite disposal of these cases, we have set up 400 fast-track courts, and these courts have been given the target that on a yearly basis per court has to ensure that they dispose of 165 cases. Now, what has been the approach of judiciary when it comes to protecting the child? So, we have the 1990 judgment, that is Vishal Jeet versus Union of India. Therein the Supreme Court rightly pointed out that when you talk about child labor, when you talk about child trafficking, it is not merely a problem of law and order. You have to understand that this is a socio-economic problem. If the family is not able to earn enough, that is the reason they force their child to enter into child labor. So you have to understand that this is a socio-economic problem, and once you understand this, the approach that you will be following, it would not be merely related to implementation of laws. You will try to provide adequate jobs to the poor and the vulnerable sections, and you will be adopting a preventive and a humanistic approach. Okay, it's not like if a child is engaging in child labor in some hazardous industry, you start punishing that child, or you start punishing the family. You have to have a humanistic approach. You need to ensure adequate opportunity for the child, that particular child is able to enjoy his fundamental right under Article 21A. Then in MC Mehta versus State of Tamil Nadu 1996 verdict of the Supreme Court basically prohibited the employment of children in hazardous industries. So the Supreme Court stated that within 6 months the government should carry out the survey that how many children are engaged in hazardous industries, and it ordered the removal of children from places like fireworks, match factories, which are basically considered to be hazardous industries. It talked about creating a welfare fund. So if somebody is illegally employing children, that employer has to pay 20,000 per child. And it also talks about creating special schools for the children who have been rehabilitated, okay, from such hazardous industries. And when it comes to children employed in non-hazardous jobs, the Supreme Court stated that because of economic compulsion, we are allowing that, okay, children can engage in non-hazardous jobs. But there also, in order to protect the child right, the Supreme Court has rightly pointed out that a child, even if that child is working in non-hazardous, jobs, would not be allowed to work for more than 6 hours per day. And he would be enjoying 2 hours of education. And this entire education cost has to be borne by the person who is employing the children. So that a way, Supreme Court tried to balance the economic compulsions of the children who are entering into child labor as well as ensuring their right to education also. Now, when it comes to the 2011 case, that is Bachpan Bachao Andolan versus Union of India case, therein the Supreme Court tried to prevent the exploitation and trafficking of children when it comes to circus especially. So it prohibited the employment of children in circuses within 2 months from the date of the order, so that we can effectively ensure that Article 21A is effectively implemented. Children are enjoying their right to free and compulsory education. Then it talked about conducting simultaneous raids in all the circuses, rescue the children. So the state has been given these two options. You rescue the child, and if the family is ready to accept the child, give them the child back. Or if the family is not ready to accept the child, then in that case, you have to create care and protective homes. There you have to ensure the rehabilitation of that child until the child attains the age of 18 years. And the state government also have to come up with a long-term scheme that how you ensure effective and long-term rehabilitation of such children who have been rescued from circuses. Okay, one thing you need to let me know in the comment section, that when it comes to this Article 21A, till what age you enjoy this Article 21A, that is the right to free and compulsory education. Okay, moving forward, the article points out that this is a socio-economic problem. Why do we say that? Because it's not the law and order problem. Factors like poverty, unemployment, migration, disasters, breakdown of family system is actually pushing the children to enter into such hazardous work. And because of social media also, fake jobs, are created. And because of these fake jobs which are there on the social media, the child is at the end getting trapped in trafficking chains. Now, having understood this, what needs to be done? So, when the government is planning any scheme, it needs to take into account the socio-economic vulnerability of the victim. So, the state should actually be guided by the new welfare approach, that is universalization of the basic services and creation of more and more job opportunities, quality jobs, so that the families are able to earn enough and the child is not forced to enter into child labor or, for that matter, child trafficking. And if, let's suppose, a child has lost his or her parents, then the state should come forward and ensure their effective rehabilitation also, and it should also ensure that such a child is enjoying right to education. Then the state needs to ensure that we are protecting social, economic and political rights of the children with the help of the institutions which are built for this particular purpose, basically childcare homes and all. And we need to ensure effective implementation. We need to improve the conviction rate so that deterrence can be created in this particular respect. For this, as the Supreme Court has stated in KP Kiran Kumar versus State 2025 judgment, that if there is some minor discrepancy in the testimony of a minor victim of child trafficking, you should not just completely negate that testimony just because of minor discrepancy. If that minor discrepancy is not changing the core aspects of that particular case. Okay, so minor discrepancy is allowed until and unless it is not changing the core facts of that particular case. That would help us in improving the conviction rate going forward. And since law and order and police are state subject, you need to ensure effective union and state collaboration in this particular respect. That's all that we need to know with respect to this particular topic. Let's move on to the next one. Now, recently, while exercising the power given to the Supreme Court under Article 142 of the Indian Constitution, Supreme Court has given the directive to the higher educational institution that you fill the faculty positions within 4 months. This particular topic you can associate with the polity section. So let's understand that what's the context. So the Supreme Court has seen this thing that mental health issues are increasing among the students. They are taking away their lives. Okay, more and more suicide cases are coming up. In this respect, the Supreme Court has highlighted that it is because of the privatization of the higher education and because of various other issues. As the students have told to the Supreme Court appointed National Task Force that we have very extremely rigid attendance policy. We are overburdened with unplanned phasing or scheduling of the academic curriculum. Exam assessment methodology is very vague. Then there is faculty shortage and non-transparent, as well as in certain institutions there is non-existence of placement processes. So if you are getting the education, the institution initially said that we have higher placement, but at the end if you are not getting placed, ultimately that creates mental health issues. So the Supreme Court first lauded this thing that okay, when it comes to India, we have increased the number of higher educational institutions and we are also witnessing privatization of higher education. Because of this, what has happened? India has emerged the second country globally wherein we have higher student enrollment ratio. But we also have the issue with quality of education. That is why the Supreme Court rightly pointed out that purely quantitative expansion without any adequate institutional support framework would leave the students vulnerable. So in order to protect the children, students studying in the higher educational institution, the Supreme Court has given various guidelines to the higher educational institution by exercising the power bestowed on the Supreme Court under Article 142. So it has stated that the faculty positions which are vacant needs to be filled within 4 months, and this is with respect to both public as well as private higher educational institution. Then when it comes to appointment of Vice Chancellor and Registrar, this should be done within a month once the post becomes vacant, and this should be made a practice. The post should not remain vacant for more than 1 month. And then when it comes to the scholarship disbursements which are not done by the government timely basis, I don't know how many of you are connected with your friends who are doing PhD and all. Therein obviously at time there is delay in getting those scholarship. So in this respect, the Supreme Court has stated that clear the backlog of the pending scholarship disbursement. It must be clear within a period of 4 months. Then this is why the Supreme Court has given this particular direction, because of increasing mental health concerns among the students. And the medical students have pointed out that we are at time forced to work for 36 to 48 hours in a go. That is problematic. And the National Task Force, which was appointed by the Supreme Court to look into this particular scenario, it has pointed out that around 65% of the higher educational institutions do not provide any mental health service. Okay, they lack mental health service providers. So the Supreme Court has given this directive that all the higher educational institutions must provide access to round the clock, that is 24/7, access to qualified medical help. And if this is not possible on a campus, then this service should be provided within a range of 1 kilometer radius. Okay. And court has ordered the sample registration system to be maintained on, basically we have to ensure the data on suicides, especially targeting the age group 15 to 29 years, so that we can get the adequate data, and based upon that we can move in the direction of evidence-based policy making. And this data needs to be centrally maintained. Now, what is important from our prelims perspective is, what is this Article 142? Because in this respect, UPSC has already asked a question. So, when you talk about Article 142, this empowers the Supreme Court to pass any order or decree to basically ensure complete justice in any pending case before it. The power is discretionary, that is, it is up to the court that whether it wants to exercise this power under Article 142 or not. No one can tell the court that you exercise the power under Article 142. Then, what is this idea of complete justice? It basically ensures going beyond technicalities and filling the legislative gaps. And it also involves interpreting or even overriding the laws if it is necessary. It's not like always the Supreme Court would be giving a verdict which goes against the prevailing law. But when it comes to idea of complete justice, in that respect, the Supreme Court can go against the laws made by the Parliament or the legislature for that matter. It can also override the laws. And this is done basically to protect the constitutional values, fundamental rights, and to ensure social welfare. When it comes to the framers of the Constitution, Dr. Ambedkar intentionally entrusted this extraordinary power only to the Supreme Court and not to the higher courts and other courts. And when it comes to the Supreme Court, we have seen that it's not like in every case the Supreme Court is using this discretionary and plenary powers. It has exercised it within self-imposed limits also. I'll be discussing the relevant case law also, wherein the Supreme Court has stated that it's not like always the Supreme Court would be giving a verdict which goes against the prevailing laws. And this enables the Supreme Court to justify its role as the guardian of the Indian Constitution. Okay, because it is enabling the Supreme Court to go against the prevailing laws and to protect the public interest, human rights, and prevent democratic breakdown. But the problem is, when it comes to this idea of complete justice, this has nowhere been clearly defined that what do we mean by complete justice. On the basis of, the cases where the Supreme Court has used this power, on the basis of that we are saying that the Supreme Court usually uses this particular Article 142 to ensure complete justice, meaning to uphold fundamental rights, to prevent breakdown of the democracy, to promote human rights, to protect public interest. But nowhere in the Constitution this term complete justice has been clearly defined. So that leads to subjectivity. Different judges might be interpreting this complete justice phrase differently. Now, where all the Supreme Court has used this particular power under Article 142. So, the recent verdict is basically a state of Tamil Nadu versus Governor of Tamil Nadu, wherein the Supreme Court gave the timeline of 30 days to the Governor, within which it has to send back the bills and grant assent. Why the Supreme Court used its power under Article 142? The Supreme Court pointed out that there is a vacuum in the Constitution, or what you can say that there is constitutional silence when it comes to the power of the Governor with respect to giving assent to the bills. Then in AG Parari-Valan versus State, in 2023 judgment, the Supreme Court basically invoked its power under Article 142 to declare that the prisoner was deemed to have served the sentence and could be released. This case was related to delay caused by the Governor in deciding the remission matters. And this was basically been done to uphold the right to life of that particular prisoner. Then in Supreme Court Bar Association versus Union of India case 1998, this was the judgment which I was talking with you people. Herein the Supreme Court stated that it's not always the Supreme Court would be giving a verdict or a decree that completely replaces the parliamentary law. Okay, and it would not be giving a judgment which at times create two different effects. Law is saying something else, the Supreme Court judgment is saying something else. So it's not like always the Supreme Court would be invoking its power under Article 142. So the Constitution bench held that the constitution powers, the court's power under Article 142 are supplementary and they must operate within the constitutional framework. So the Supreme Court is also guided by the doctrine of separation of power. Okay. Now, on this, UPSC has already asked a question, so I want you people to let me know the answer with respect to this particular question. And with this, let's move on to the next topic. Now, sadly, in the state of Madhya Pradesh, 2 children have died because of this Guillain-Barre-Syndrome. This particular topic you can associate with the science section of your prelim syllabus. And in this respect, the state government has stated that we will be bearing the expense of treatment of all the patients who have, we have this concern that this disease might have affected the other individuals also. So the state government would be bearing the expense of treatment of all the patients. Red Cross Society has also come forward to provide the necessary support. And the National Joint Outbreak Response Team is going to visit Madhya Pradesh, okay, to basically trace the contamination. Now, when you talk about this particular disease, it is a rare autoimmune disorder wherein your immune system mistakenly start attacking your peripheral nerves, which lead to symptoms like limb weakness, difficulty swallowing, and it could lead to muscle weakness, and in severe cases, it could lead to paralysis also. Now, when it comes to this particular disease, it is common among the adult and males, but it can affect individual of all ages. What are the causes? Now, if you go by the WHO website also, the exact cause of this particular syndrome is not known till now. But according to WHO, this is often caused by a bacterial or viral infection. So if you are having some bacterial or viral infection, there is high chance that you might be developing this particular syndrome. And in rare cases, if you got vaccinated and after the surgery also, in rare cases, there is a risk of you developing this particular disease. Now, what are the symptoms? So, initial symptoms would be numbness, tingling sensations starting in legs and often spreading to arm and face. Then, in progressive symptom, what would happen? You will find it difficult to walk, limb paralysis and muscle coordination issues would be there. And in the severe cases, there could be paralysis of the respiratory muscles. When it comes to the treatment of this particular syndrome, what we have intravenous immunoglobulin, which contains healthy antibodies from the donated blood, and it calms the immune system's attack on the peripheral nerves. Then we have plasma exchange. So we remove the harmful antibodies from the bloodstream by infusing new plasma. Then supportive care, ventilator support for respiratory paralysis and physical therapy for rehabilitation. That's all that we need to know with respect to this particular topic. Let's move on to the next one. Now, recently in the southern India, we are witnessing root wilt disease, which is negatively impacting the coconut trees. This particular topic you can associate with the environment section of your prelim syllabus. So, when you talk about the state of Karnataka, Tamil Nadu and Kerala, they account for more than 80% of India's coconut production. And it is in these states we are witnessing the instances of root wilt disease, which is negatively impacting the coconut plantation. This is caused because of a microscopic adversary, that is phytoplasma. Let's understand about this particular disease in more detailed format. So, it is caused by phytoplasma, which is basically a bacteria, and it is going to impact the coconut palms. It is a non-fatal disease and it was first identified in Kerala way back 150 years ago. It is not lethal, but it is going to negatively impact the, the potential of coconut palms. When it comes to its transmission, so it spreads through insect vectors, which are basically aided by movement of wind. So if there is wind going on, so the insects vectors would be able to spread over a larger area. And uninterrupted stretches of coconut plantation. So if you have large area under coconut plantation, if one plant get infected, then other plants would also get impacted. Now, this particular disease occur in all major soil types, but it spread faster in sandy loam and alluvial soil. What are the factors which accelerate the spread? So, basically erratic temperatures, because if you have, more rainfall, or if there is high temperature, then in that case what could happen? So, the insects would multiply. specifically extremes. The rise of new sucking pests, particularly white flies, have significantly accelerated the spread. So when there's moisture kind of a weather, it is easier for the insect to grow. What are the symptoms of this particular disease? So you will witness the tapering of the terminal portion of the trunk of the coconut tree, reduction in leaf size, and your coconut tree leaves would become like this. Okay, so abnormal bending of the leaflets happen just like this, as you can see in this picture. Flowering is delayed and tree would slowly become more and more weak. So the impact would be the tree quickly becomes unproductive and shed all its nuts and assume a distorted appearance. What all strategy we can employ here? So the farmers needs to select and multiply tolerant palms. Then good crop management practices should be adopted, basically removing the infected palms, because as I told you, if there is a large area under coconut plantation, if one tree got impacted, the other coconut trees would also get impacted. Improve the soil health, ensure proper irrigation and drainage, and adopts suitable intercropping to reduce the spread. And then strengthen the palms with organic nutrition. So basically you can use organic manure to improve the soil health and root strength, because it also impacts the root. This would help us enhancing the disease tolerance. That's all with respect to this particular topic. Let's move on to the next topic. Now, recently the media associations have made a request to the government that you appoint the new chairperson for the Press Council of India. This particular topic you can associate with the polity section. Why? Because this council has been working without a chairperson for the first time in its history. Now let's note down certain film pointers with respect to this particular body. So it was first set up way back in 1966 based on the recommendation of First Press Commission, which was headed by Justice J.R. Madhulkar. Presently, the council is functioning under the Press Council Act of 1978. It is a statutory body because it has been created through an act. It is a quasi-judicial body and act as a watchdog for the press freedom. So the objective is basically to preserve the freedom of press and maintain and improve the standards when it comes to journalism. When you talk about the composition, so it has one chairperson and 28 other members. The chairman is selected by Speaker of Lok Sabha, chairman of the Rajya Sabha, and a member elected by the Press Council of India itself. Okay, so 3 people are there who select the chairman. And chairman by convention is basically a retired judge of the Supreme Court. And when you talk about the term of both the chairman as well as member, it is 3 years. When it comes to its function, so it has to frame a media code of conduct, ensuring ethical and accurate reporting, fostering public responsibility, monitor restriction on news flow, and oversee foreign media assistance. When you talk about its power, so it can censure, it can warn the newspapers, agencies, journalists for violation of journalist ethics. Okay, after a fair inquiry. It may also require publication of inquiry details in public interest. The decision given by this particular body is final and cannot be appealed before a court of law. It has the power of civil courts. Basically, it can summon the witnesses, examine documents, conducting inquiries deemed as judicial proceeding. That is why we said that it is a statutory as well as a quasi-judicial body. However, it cannot compel the disclosure of journalistic sources. And another limitation on this particular body is it only oversees the print media. It has no authority over the electronic media. Okay, basically your radio, television and internet platforms. That's all that we have to learn today. So quiz would be coming right up next. So don't forget to practice the quiz and check your knowledge. Till then, keep smiling, keep learning. Have a great day all of you.